standing in the driveway of a house I had never been invited inside, when my son's wife opened the front door just wide enough to look at me like I was a stranger selling something she didn't need. I had driven 40 minutes from Macon to surprise them. I had a casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel on the passenger seat and a birthday card for my granddaughter in my purse. She was turning 7. I thought that counted for something. "She's not feeling well," my daughter-in-law said. Her name was Amber. She had hair the color of honey and eyes that had never once looked at me with anything that resembled warmth. "Maybe another time." I stood there holding that casserole dish like an idiot. "I made her favorite," I said. "The mac and cheese with the breadcrumbs on top. She asked me for it last month." Amber shrugged, one shoulder, barely. "She's asleep." The door closed before I could say another word. I sat in my car for a long time before I started the engine. I didn't cry. I was past crying by then. I just sat there looking at the house. The house with the wraparound porch my son had always wanted. The house with the 3-car garage and the landscaping that cost more per month than my first car payment. And I thought about the fact that I had helped make every single bit of it possible. Not metaphorically, not in the way parents like to say they gave their children everything. I mean, I had a spreadsheet. I had started keeping it 18 months earlier, almost by accident. I had just retired from 31 years as a school librarian in Bibb County, Georgia. And my husband, Edward, had passed 4 years before that, and I was managing my own finances for the first time in my adult life. My financial advisor, a kind woman named Sandra, who had been doing my taxes for a decade, had told me to write down every outgoing payment so I could see clearly where my retirement income was going. I did what she said. The list got longer than I expected. My son's name was Derek. He was 41 years old, 6'1", and had worked in commercial real estate since his late 20s. His wife Amber worked part-time at a boutique in Buckhead that sold candles and throw pillows for amounts of money that made me genuinely dizzy. Together, they made what I would have considered a very comfortable living. Derek had told me once, offhand, that his commission from a single deal the year before had been more than I made in 5 years of teaching. And yet, the first payment had started 9 years ago, when Derek and Amber had just gotten married and were renting an apartment in Midtown Atlanta that was, in their words, temporary. They needed help with first and last month's rent and the deposit while they waited on a deal to close. I had just lost Edward. I was lonely and scared, and Derek was my only child, and I said yes without thinking twice. The deal closed. The help continued. Over the following years, in ways that were small enough that I could always talk myself into them, I had been paying for pieces of their life. Derek's car insurance when rates went up. Amber's credit card when she'd had what she called a rough month. The girls' private school tuition when Derek said cash flow was tight. The quarterly pest control, the landscaping, the housekeeper who came every other Thursday, a medical bill after Amber's knee surgery, 2 months of their mortgage when Derek said a deal fell through and he needed a bridge. When I wrote it all down, the number was 89. 89 separate payments over 9 years, ranging from $62 to $11,000. Some were loans that became gifts when no one ever mentioned repaying them. Some were never framed as anything but gifts in the first place. All of them were voluntary, or at least that was what I told myself, because no one had ever pointed a gun at my head. They had done something quieter than that. They had simply let me keep saying yes. I drove home from that birthday party I was not allowed to attend, and I sat at my kitchen table in Macon with the casserole dish still warm in front of me, and I read through the spreadsheet for the first time start to finish. It took a while. My hands were shaking a little, not from anger, not yet, but from the feeling you get when you see something clearly for the first time that you had been choosing not to look at for a very long time. 89 payments. I had a fixed income, a teacher's pension from Georgia TRS, and a Social Security check that together came to a little under $4,000 a month. I owned my house free and clear, which was the only reason any of this had been possible. I had savings, but not the kind of savings you have when you're 63 years old and your only child has been making withdrawals from your life for 9 years. I sat there a long time. I want to be honest about what I was feeling, because it wasn't just anger and it wasn't just sadness. It was something more complicated than that, and I think it deserves to be named. I was ashamed, not of them, of myself, of how many times I had written a check or set up a bank transfer and felt, just for a moment, like I mattered to them. Like the money was buying me a seat at the table I kept being turned away from. Like if I could just cover this one thing, they would finally let me in. A 7-year-old girl was sleeping 38 miles away, and I had never once been asked to pick her up from school. I had 2 granddaughters, and I could count on one hand the number of times I had been alone with either of them for more than an hour. I ate the mac and cheese by myself that night. I did not sleep well. I lay in the dark and thought about Sandra's advice, not just the spreadsheet, but something else she had said once, quietly, as we were wrapping up a meeting. She had looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Eloise, you need to make sure you can take care of yourself first. You cannot pour from an empty pitcher." I had nodded and said, "Of course," and promptly ignored her. In the morning, I called her. I told her what I had found. I read her some of the numbers. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "How are you feeling right now?" I said I wasn't sure. She said, "I think you already know what you need to do." I did know. I just needed a little more time to be brave enough to do it. The thing that finally decided it for me happened 3 weeks later. Derek called on a Sunday afternoon, which was unusual because Derek almost exclusively communicated by text. I felt a small lift of hope when I saw his name on my phone. Isn't that something? After everything I had just spent a week staring at, I still felt a little jump in my chest when my son called. "Hey, Mom," he said. He had a particular tone he used when he needed something. Warm, easy, slightly distracted sounding, like he was doing me a favor by fitting the conversation in. "You doing okay?" "I'm doing fine," I said. "How are the girls?" Great. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something. We've been looking at refinancing the house, and with rates where they are, it actually makes a lot of sense for us. But we need to cover some closing costs and float a couple months while the new payment kicks in. It's about $8,000. I was wondering if you could help us out. I was quiet. "Mom, I heard you. Is everything okay?" I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree in my backyard, the one Edward had planted the year we bought the house. It was 40 years old and enormous, and in the spring it dropped pollen on everything, and I had never once thought about cutting it down. "I've been going through my finances," I said. "Okay." His voice shifted. "Not much, but enough." "Okay, sure. Are you having some kind of issue?" "No issue. I've just been looking at the full picture, looking at what I spend each month." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been writing down all my outgoing payments, all of them." Another pause. Longer. "Mom, I don't know what you're." 89 payments, Derek, over 9 years. I added it up. It's close to $120,000. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing I had ever heard. "I don't," he started. "That's not," he stopped. "Some of that was loans we always intended to." "I know," I said. "I know you intended to. I'm not calling to fight with you. I'm just telling you that I've been looking at the full picture, and when I do that, I realize that I need to make some changes." "What kind of changes?" "I'm going to stop the automatic payments I have set up, the school tuition, the landscaping account, the car insurance. I'm going to stop those." His voice changed completely then. The warmth was gone. "You're serious?" "I am." "Mom, the tuition payment is due in 3 weeks. The girls are enrolled. You can't just." "You're their father," I said. "You'll figure it out." I will not pretend that conversation didn't hurt. It hurt like pulling a tooth, that specific pain that is somehow both sharp and dull at the same time, necessary and awful. Derek did not yell. He was too controlled for that. He said some things, carefully worded, about how he had expected more from me, about how he would have to explain this to the girls, about how he hoped I understood what I was doing. I said I hoped so too. I hung up and went out to the backyard and sat under Edward's oak tree for a long time. I talked to him a little. I do that sometimes when I need to think through something difficult. I told him what I had done and what I was about to do, and I sat there until I felt something that wasn't exactly peace, but was the beginning of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I canceled everything. I called my bank. I called the insurance company. I sent an email to the school's billing office, politely, explaining that the family would be making other arrangements. I removed Derek and Amber from the secondary account I kept for years, specifically because it was easier to transfer money to them that way. I closed that account entirely. I did not do it in secret, and I did not do it with any drama. I simply stopped. Amber called me 4 days after the first missed payment. She did not bother with warmth. She said she was very disappointed in me. She said she had always tried to make me feel welcome in their lives. She said that what I was doing was going to affect her children, and that if anything happened to the girls' school situation, I would have to live with that. I let her finish. Then I said, Amber, I hope you and Derek find a way to manage. I really do, but I've given what I can give, and now I need to take care of myself. She hung up. Derek called 2 days after that. His voice was different this time. The controlled quality was still there, but there was something underneath it, something that I recognized from when he was a boy and had done something wrong and knew it. He didn't apologize exactly. He said he had been thinking. He said that maybe things had gotten out of hand over the years, and that he hadn't always been paying close enough attention to the situation. I took that for what it was. I'm not trying to punish you, I told him. I just can't keep going the way we were going. I know, he said. There was a long quiet between us, the kind that has weight. Are you okay? He asked finally, and for the first time in a long time, it sounded like he actually wanted to know the answer. I'm getting there, I said. The months that followed were not easy. I won't dress that up. Derek and Amber had built their life on a foundation that included my contributions, and when those contributions stopped, there was adjustment. The girls moved to the public school 3 blocks from their house, which was, by any reasonable measure, a perfectly fine school. The landscaping company was canceled. The housekeeper went from twice a month to once. They were not in poverty. They were simply living within their means for perhaps the first time in their marriage. I heard about most of this secondhand through Derek, who called more in those months than he had in the previous 3 years combined. I started saying no to things I had never said no to before, and I started saying yes to things I had put off for years. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I booked a trip to Savannah with my friend Eloise, who had been asking me to go with her for 2 summers. I had my back porch screened in, which Edward and I had talked about doing for 20 years. I joined a book club at the library where I used to work, which felt like coming home. I am not a woman who believes that money is the measure of love. I was a librarian for 31 years, and I believe what I always told my students, that the most valuable things are rarely the most expensive ones. But I had confused 2 things for a very long time. I had confused paying for someone's life with being part of it. I had told myself that every check I wrote was an act of love, and some of them were in the beginning, but somewhere along the way it had stopped being love and started being a toll. A fee I was paying for access to my own son and grandchildren. The difference, when I finally stopped paying it, was that the access didn't go away. Derek brought the girls to Macon for Thanksgiving that year. He came by himself a week before to help me fix the gutter that had been pulling away from the house since last spring. He got up on the ladder without me even asking. We didn't talk about the money, and we didn't not talk about it. It sat between us like something that had already been said, acknowledged, folded up, and put away. My granddaughter Lily, the 7-year-old who had apparently been asleep when I came with the casserole dish, sat on my kitchen counter while I made her the mac and cheese with the breadcrumbs on top. She asked me why I'd put breadcrumbs on it, and I told her it was because her father had asked me the same question in this same kitchen when he was 5 years old, and I had promised him I'd always make it that way. She thought about that for a second, and then she asked me if she could stir it. I handed her the spoon. Amber was polite at Thanksgiving. Not warm, not what I would call a changed person, but polite. We are not close, and I have made my peace with that. Some people show you exactly who they are, and the kindest thing you can do for yourself is believe them. But my son helped me with the gutter, and my granddaughter stirred the mac and cheese. And for the first time in years, I sat at my own table on Thanksgiving and felt like I wasn't paying to be there. Sandra asked me a few months later, when we met for our annual review, how I was doing with everything. I showed her the updated spreadsheet. The outgoing column was shorter now, tidier. The savings line had started moving in the right direction for the first time since I retired. "Good," she said in her quiet way. "You did a hard thing." "I did a necessary thing," I said. She nodded and said those were sometimes the same. I still have the spreadsheet. I keep it updated, not out of bitterness, not as a record of what was done to me, but because Sandra was right. It matters to be able to see clearly where your life is going. It matters to know what you are choosing. 89 payments, over 9 years, $119,000 and some change, if you add it all up the way I eventually did. That money is gone. I'm not getting it back, and I have stopped wanting to. What I have instead is a screened-in porch and a watercolor class on Wednesday evenings and a trip to Savannah I still think about. I have a granddaughter who calls me on Sunday afternoons, not because her parents remind her to, but because she wants to tell me what she learned in school. I have a son who climbed a ladder and fixed my gutter without being asked. Some things you cannot buy. I know that now because I spent 9 years trying. I think about that driveway a lot, not with bitterness anymore, but with a kind of quiet clarity that took me a long time to earn. When I was standing there holding that casserole dish, waiting for a door to open that never really did, I was not a victim of two cruel people. I was a woman who had made a choice, over and over again, for 9 years and had never been honest with herself about what that choice was costing her. That is not blame. That is just the truth, and I have found that the truth, even the uncomfortable kind, is the only thing that actually helps. What I know now is that every action has a consequence that runs in both directions. Derek and Amber did not become who they were overnight. They became who they were because the situation allowed it. Because I kept saying yes. Because I confused love with funding and presence with payment. I was not a bad mother, but I was a mother who had stopped asking hard questions. And that gap between what I was doing and what I was telling myself I was doing is where 9 years quietly disappeared. The hardest part of what I did was not canceling the payments. The paperwork was easy. The hard part was being honest enough with myself to admit that I had known, somewhere underneath everything, for a long time. It takes a certain kind of clear-eyed courage to look at a spreadsheet you built yourself and follow it all the way to the number at the bottom. To not look away. To say out loud, "This is what happened, and I was part of it, and now I am going to change it." That kind of honesty is not something anyone can hand you. Sandra could tell me to write things down. She could look at me over her reading glasses and say what I already knew, but the moment of actually seeing, really seeing, that had to come from me. Intelligence without the willingness to look at yourself is just cleverness in a nice coat. It does not save you. And then there is what comes after the seeing, the doing. The part where you make the phone call anyway, even though your hands are a little unsteady. where you say the thing out loud to your son, the one you love more than you have words for, and you hold the line even when his voice goes cold, where you cancel the accounts and send the emails and sit under a tree and feel the full weight of what you have just done. That's steadiness. The kind that is not hardness, not cruelty, but just a firm and quiet refusal to abandon yourself. That is what I am most proud of. Not the outcome, the doing of it. Derek fixed my gutter. Lily stirred the mac and cheese. Those things matter to me more than I can say. But I want to be clear. I did not stop the payments in order to get those things. I stopped them because it was the right thing to do. And the right thing has its own reward that does not depend on anyone else's response. That is what I would tell anyone who sees themselves in this story. Not to be hard, not to keep score, but to be honest, to be clear-eyed, and when you finally know what you need to do, to be brave enough to do it, even when your hands are shaking. Some things you cannot buy. I know that now because I spent 9 years trying.